Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about This Is Us, Season 4, Episode 12, A Hell of a Week Part 2, the most recent episode of the series. As usual, this will not be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, stop watching now and go watch it. Unless, of course, you don't mind me spoiling the episode for you. I mean, it's a free country, I can't tell you what to do, but you have been warned. I thought there was a 50-50 shot that I was not going to like this episode. I've made no secret of the fact that I haven't exactly been thrilled with Kevin's storyline since the fall finale. I thought his thread in the 10th episode of the season, the one directly after the fall break, was silly and probably should have been cut. Other threads in that episode could have used more time, specifically the Rebecca illness storyline, or even Toby and Kate. In that episode, they were trying to cram a lot in, to move the pieces around, to get them ready for this trilogy. Nothing that happens in this episode changes my mind about Kevin's thread. They easily could have kicked off the adult Kevin storyline in this episode by having him on set with M. Night Shyamalan, the famous director of The Sixth Sense, by the way, who's making his second appearance in the series. And then he gets a phone call from Sophie, letting him know that her mother died. Which is pretty much what happens anyway. This episode for me was saddled with some baggage, and that was the fact that I was not thrilled with the way they'd been taking Kevin as a character. It would have been better off if they did not do what they did in the fall finale, which is set it up so that we were all wondering who in 9 months was Kevin going to be engaged to and having a child with. I get why they did it. They want to get people talking about the show. They want to get people talking about this issue. And in that, they've succeeded. There are so many threads on the bulletin boards, on Facebook, wondering who is Kevin's baby mama gonna be. The promo didn't exactly win me over. It suggested to me a High Fidelity situation. High Fidelity being a movie quite a few years ago starring John Cusack. In that movie, his ex-girlfriend calls him to tell him that her father died. He goes to the funeral and she tells him that she just wants to leave. And they engage in extracurricular activities. And for her, this is mostly about feeling something other than pain and grief about losing her father. But once again, I was proven wrong, and the episode presented a very lovely story. I have quibbles with it, certainly, and I'm not exactly thrilled with how the ending played out, but all in all, this was a pretty good episode, once again. In the last video, I talked about wanting more from the teen Kevin storyline. I wanted to see him more, I wanted to get more background into what he was doing, and I got some of what I wished for in this episode. Here's the thing though, I have never actually bought Logan Schroyer as a teen Kevin. The problem is that the adult Kevin is played by Justin Hartley, who oozes charisma and charm. I don't see any of that in the younger teen version of him. And I get, as a teenager, he wouldn't be fully formed as the adult Kevin. But you see, in Hannah Zeal, who plays the teen version of Kate, I see some of Kate in the teen's portrayal. In Niles Fitch, who plays the younger Randall, I see the older Randall in him. I do not quite see the older Kevin in Logan Schroyer. Now, I'm not saying he's a bad actor. He does fine work in this series. In the second season, during his old injury arc, he was great. And in this episode, he puts in fine work. It's just that I don't quite buy him as the younger version of the adult Kevin. And I'm not entirely sure that he can pull off some of the things that I want to see from his character. But like I said, he put in some fine work in this episode. His scenes are kind of disjointed at times. There's two separate teen Kevin storylines going on during this episode, and sometimes it's a little hard to follow which one we're in. Or at least I had that problem. We see him in the events leading up to his father's death, and then we see his storyline play out in the aftermath of his father's death. We start off in the past timeline with Jack and the much younger Kevin. In the last video, I think I identified them as being around 5. I'm pretty sure that's inaccurate. I think they're at least a few years younger than what I was saying in the last video. As soon as I saw that they were starting off the episode with Jack and the much younger Kevin, who's having trouble sleeping, immediately after Randall was having trouble sleeping, I knew how this thread was going to end. And sure enough, at the end of the episode, or towards the end, Jack ends up having to deal with Kate, who's also having trouble sleeping. And that's pretty much where I'm going to leave this thread. I don't really have much more to say about the past timeline in this episode. I honestly think that this was trying to break the record for the amount of timelines that could be featured in one show. We have Kevin at 3-4 years old. We see Kevin as the middle schooler. 2 timelines concerning the teen Kevin, and then the adult Kevin's timeline. From there, we cut to a shot of Randall going into his kitchen to be confronted by the home invader that we saw in the last episode. And I don't think that shot is completely necessary. I get why they did it. They wanted to ground us in the timeline of exactly where Kevin's story began when we first see him in this episode. But I think as the audience, we generally got the idea already, and I don't think the hand-holding was necessary, nor really a good idea. And then we're back on set with Kevin and M. Night Shyamalan. He gets the call from Sophie that her mother died. And Kevin has a flashback to him as a teenager just before his father died, literally that night. It's not a long scene, but it's just enough to hint at the relationship between Kevin and Sophie's mom. She's really supportive of him. And from that, we get right away that Sophie's mom dying is not just a loss for Sophie, but it's also a loss for Kevin. Sophie's fiancé is supportive, but he doesn't really get it because both of his parents are still alive. She knows that Kevin understands the loss of a parent. Kevin interrupts her in the middle of talking and says, "I got one for you. Are you ready?" She lets out a breath and then says, "Ready." Kevin says he starts a cider brewing company and he calls it, "How do you like them apples?" Sophie laughs at this. We don't quite get, at this point in time, what's going on here. But when it's revealed, it's quite beautiful. This is enough for Sophie. This is what she wanted and needed at this moment. Before she goes, Kevin says one last time that he's really sorry. His voice is filled with empathy, and it's pretty clear that there are still plenty of feelings left there for her. After the credits, we see teen Kevin and teen Sophie in the car, semi-arguing about whether to go into his own house. She mentions the fact that they haven't been there since the weird dinner party, where Kate's boyfriend showed up unannounced. Kevin is talking about how his mom is basically going to be fawning all over him, asking a billion questions about his acting career, and that she will probably have a headshot up on the wall of him. If he believes any of that, he's in for a bit of an awakening. We're right in the scene in the last episode where teen Kate was arguing with her boyfriend, and Randall was having nightmares that he declines to tell his mother about. But this time the scene plays out from Kevin's perspective. Now, I'm not catching a glimpse of the adult Kevin in the teen Kevin's performance, but I am seeing the humor that we frequently see in the adult Kevin, if that makes any sense. Rebecca greets them happily, and Kevin is expecting to hear something about his appearance on the soap opera, but she doesn't say anything about it. And when Kevin brings it up, it's revealed that she didn't even see it. She thought that his part was cut in the show, but only his line was cut in the show. He was still there. This plays into a long history of Kevin basically being the ignored child. And I get the sense that that is how teen Kevin is taking it. But here's the thing. Right now, Kate is arguing on the phone and having a very unhealthy relationship with her boyfriend that's throwing all sorts of red flags off. Randall is over here having nightmares, which he's completely missing, and he's clearly not well. I'm not necessarily blaming her for not noticing any of that, and actually there's actually signs in the promo that she does recognize that Kate's relationship isn't any good. But my point is that she doesn't seem to have a grip on any of them. Never mind Kevin. This is more about her struggles in the wake of Jack's death than being about ignoring Kevin and having him be the forgotten child. But given the history, it's kind of hard for Kevin not to take it that way. He doesn't say it, but you can see it. Kate's locked in her room. Randall leaves. Rebecca goes to her job, leaving an empty house. And Kevin asks Sophie if there's anybody at her house. They go to Sophie's house, where Sophie's mom is, and she greets them happily. She's fawning over Kevin about his TV appearance, telling him how convincing he is, and even after he seems discouraged that they cut his line, she takes his face and says, "Never settle." The contrast between Rebecca and Sophie's mom here is pretty depressing. But there is very clearly a lot of love between the two of them. He's almost like her second son, and given the fact that Sophie and him have known each other for practically ever at this point, that's not really that surprising. The adult Kevin cruises around town, stopping at his old haunts, going down memory lane. He remembers a donut shop that him and Sophie used to go to as kids, and a playscape that the 12-year-old version of the character used to play at. And my God, we see a brief shot of the middle school version of Kevin, and honestly, it's just amazing to me how much that kid has grown up, and indeed, the middle school versions of the character have grown up since the beginning of the series. It's getting to the point where I would almost be concerned that they weren't going to be able to use those kids anymore because they were going to get too old. But according to the creators of the series, they've actually shot scenes for future use now, including scenes that are supposed to be included in the finale. The adult Kevin even went to the campsite in the woods where he originally learned of his father's death. We see him get a text message from Randall, and this is the point where we saw him last week in the prior episode. We watch a part of that scene again, this time from Kevin's perspective, but thankfully we don't see the entire thing. We see Kevin at the funeral, and then we cut to the teen timeline, where Sophie and Kevin are with her mother. Her mother makes Sophie angry over something that she bought when they should have been spending money on something else, and she quickly vacates the scene, giving Kevin an opportunity to talk to Sophie's mother alone. Kevin wasn't able to give Sophie her dream wedding, but she's hoping that she can give her her dream ring, which is her grandma's emerald ring. And now that he has the opportunity, he asks for it. We cut back to the funeral, where Kevin is looking on as Sophie speaks about her mother. A story about how she was rude to a person at a coffee house that she and her mom used to go to, that she will no longer be able to go to because of her mom's death. Sophie doesn't notice him right away. It takes some time, but eventually she does. and they silently acknowledge each other. After the funeral is over, it looks like Kevin is thinking about approaching Sophie. But then she notices her fiancé grabbing her hand and talking to her, and he thinks better of it, and he simply leaves. The next we see of Kevin, he's driving up to Sophie's house where the reception is being held. He has a box of donuts from a donut shop that they used to go to as kids. He approaches the house, and then he calls Sophie. The old Kevin probably would have just gone right in, but instead he decides to call her from the front porch while looking at her to see if it's okay if he stopped by. It's a small little sign of Kevin's maturity. She agrees to let him come, and then tells her where he is, and she finally notices him. Instead of having him come in, she goes out, and they leave together. We saw this in trailers, and I thought this was going to lead to a high-fidelity situation. But it really doesn't. It's just a trip down memory lane from them, and it stays platonic. She doesn't jump in the sack with him immediately, which is where I thought they were going with this. Cut back to Sophie's mom and Kevin, and she's telling the story of that ring. Sophie's grandparents fell in love when they were in the middle of getting divorced, which was not exactly common back in the day. And he got drafted. He was going to give her that ring, but she told him to hold on to it, to give it to her when he got back. And he did so, and they were married for 50 years. Sophie's mom, with clear affection, tells him that he's going to go places, that he's got a bright future ahead of him. And Kevin is kind of confused and wondering, does this mean I'm going to get the ring? And the answer is no. He hasn't quite earned it yet. When we come back from commercials, we briefly see Kevin and Sophie in the car, and this is the current timeline. And then we cut back to the teen timeline, but the one before he learns of his father's death. They're at the movies watching Good Will Hunting. When the movie, towards the end, has a malfunction of some sorts and stops playing, the ushers come out to tell them that they'll fix the problem as soon as they can. In the meantime, they can help themselves to anything in the concession stand on the house. We cut back to the present day timeline. Sophie and Kevin are in the car. They have a heart-to-heart. And then after a little bit, Sophie says that she's got one and asks him if he's ready. He says that if she's got one, he's ready. She says that he decides that he needs to go away from everyone. So he goes to Alaska to become an ice fisherman and never talks to another soul. We still don't quite know what they're doing here, but Kevin appears to be impressed by her answer. And after a pause, he asks her if he can take her somewhere, and she agrees to do so. The spot that he ends up taking her to is the spot in the forest where they once camped at the party, and where Kevin found out that Jack had died. He tells her that he couldn't imagine for the longest time coming back to this spot, or even being around the town that he's currently in, because it carried with him so many painful memories. There were good memories there too, but they were overshadowed by his father's death. But he's able to go there now, showing a certain degree of healing that I don't think Kevin has demonstrated up until this point. His point to her is that one day she will be able to go back to that coffee shop, because one day she will be healed enough to do so. We cut back to the teens just before he learns of his father's death. They're talking about the possibility that maybe they should have stuck around to see the end of the movie. But Kevin disagrees. Kevin thinks that it's actually kind of perfect not knowing the ending, because now they can imagine any ending that they want. They make a vow to never see the ending of the movie. And that's what we've been witnessing this entire time. Kevin and Sophie's alternate endings to Good Will Hunting, a movie that they never saw the ending of. And I thought that reveal was quite lovely. In the present day timeline, they each reveal that they never actually saw the ending of the movie. And that so they decide to watch it and see for themselves how it actually ended. When they finish watching it, they feel that they couldn't possibly have come up with a better ending. I don't know about that though, because Sophie's ice fisherman one works pretty well for me. They stare at each other for a while, silently, with clear love still in their eyes. And she eventually tells him that she needs to go back. Kevin's eyes are moist. It's clear he doesn't want to take her back. But of course he does. When they return to the house, Kevin jokingly says, "See you the next time someone dies." And she says she's already looking forward to it. She tells him to wait for a few minutes because she wants to grab something. And when she comes back with the headshot that Kevin once gave her mother. If this is the end of their story, the end for these two characters, I think it's a pretty good one. And I think it should be the ending. But I have a funny feeling it's not going to be. Alexandra Breckenridge and Justin Hartley have amazing chemistry together. It's not surprising to me that people in the fandom are rooting for this couple to be a thing and for her to be Kevin's baby mama. This episode felt like a goodbye, but we'll see if it's going to be. Kevin goes to Sophie's mom's grave to talk to her. He tells her that he did it, that he made it. He tells her he was pretty certain that she knew that he was going to be a success, that she always believed in him. But he also messed things up with Sophie. And he feels that she knew he was going to do that too. He says he wished he had another crack at that ring, because this time he was ready. I'm not totally convinced of that. Kevin has made progress for sure, but I'm not totally convinced that he's where he thinks he is. When it comes to recovery, whether it be drug addiction or alcohol abuse or from mental illness, such as when I was having panic attacks back in the day, you're never quite as good as you think you are. You always get that little reality check. I still believe that Kevin has a ways to go before he is truly ready. Which is one of the big reasons why I'm not a fan of this whole, okay, Kevin's going to be engaged with a kid on the way within 9 months, and now less than that. Because I want better for Kevin than this. He puts his headshot on the grave to give her back the headshot that he originally gave to her. And then leaves. But then comes back to grab it because that's weird. At least he thinks so. I kind of wish they ended the episode right there, because it's actually a rather beautiful ending for what amounts to a beautiful story. But they keep going. Kevin returns to LA and decides to stop at Kate and Toby's house to see how baby Jack is doing. Neither one of them are there, but Madison is. Madison, that I will remind you that Kevin and her have not had many scenes together in this show. And the ones that they did are not very friendly. She's not thrilled to see him, and that's partly because she just broke up with her boyfriend. Kevin tells her that he doesn't usually get dumped, because he's usually the one to cut and run when things get tough. That might be true of most of his history, but it wasn't true with Zoe last year. They split because Kevin wanted kids and Zoe didn't. When you have different lifestyle goals, that's not going to work. And so their relationship ended. I also have this theory on Kevin. He doesn't think very much of himself. He has a terrible self-image when it comes down to it, though he projects otherwise. And I think a part of him feels like he doesn't deserve to be happy. So when he is, he hits the self-destruct button. Addicts will do that every now and again, regardless. Now, I'm not a drug addict or an alcoholic, but I exhibit some of the same patterns. Every now and again, I'll blow up my life. I'm hoping to be past that. I'm not completely convinced, especially from where things go from here, that Kevin is. The next thing we know, we're in the scene where Randall calls Kevin to admit that he is not okay. And the person he was sleeping with was Madison. There was a good chunk of the fandom that was not happy with this result. They wanted Kevin to be with Sophie, and they were very unhappy to see him suddenly in bed with Madison. Kevin, come here for a sec. We need to talk. Listen. Must you sleep with everybody? Okay, and while we're talking, I'm going to make this very clear. You and I are not sleeping together. I don't care how much you flash those puppy dog eyes at me. It's not going to happen. All kidding aside, Kevin got flamed as a character on the fan sites that I read. Many of them having different problems and different issues with this. Some mostly upset that Madison was the one that he is ending up sleeping with, thinking that she is actually the one that he is going to be engaged to with a kid. I don't buy this. I think this is a head fake by the creators. They're just screwing with us at this point. Like I said before, I can barely recall these characters even interacting. I mean, there was a couple episodes ago where they were in the same scene, but they weren't exactly talking to each other. The last time I can recall them interacting at all was last season when Kate was having the baby and it was having issues, and they were in the hospital. And that wasn't a pleasant conversation. But let's get to my actual problem with this. And it's not that Kevin sleeps around. Hey, Kevin, you're a good-looking guy. You can do as you please. As long as it's consensual, and as long as the people that you're sleeping with are okay with it just being casual, then fine. It does go against your stated goals of wanting something more meaningful, but whatever. My problem is with who he ends up sleeping with. When you're in recovery, it is recommended that you not form new romantic relationships or engage in sexual activities for at least the first year of being in recovery. I didn't exactly know why this was, so I looked into it. I read online that when you're first in recovery, you're emotionally fragile. And then I asked a buddy, someone I know, who also is in recovery, and I asked him this question. And he said to me that when you're first in recovery, you're supposed to be getting to know yourself, among other things. And you can't really give yourself over to someone emotionally until you've done that. I don't know how long it's been for Kevin at this point, how long he's been in recovery this time. I don't think it's been a year. But I definitely know that it wasn't a year when he slept with Cassidy for her. Cassidy being the Jennifer Morrison character that he was trying to help get back with her husband. Towards the end of that arc, they ended up sleeping together, which not only undermined his efforts to get her back with him, and it probably wasn't going to work out anyway, but still, not only that, but it also jeopardized her recovery. In essence, a selfish act on his part. And now here you are, sleeping with your sister's best friend, which could cause problems between the two of them, and yourself in your relationship with your sister Kate. Now, we know that Kate is not the one Kevin isn't speaking to 9 months from now. That would be Randall. But still, it could have caused an issue, and it's frankly not worth it. Kevin is an empathetic human being who is capable of connecting with just about anybody. He's one of my favorite characters. He's a good guy, but he's also a complete train wreck of a human being, and this is just another example of it. Kevin himself in this scene does not seem thrilled at all with what has transpired. He's on the phone with Randall and suggesting they go to the cabin for a retreat. Randall suggests bringing Kate, and Kevin's reaction is kind of a little bit of hesitance, but yeah, he agrees. And I think the reason for his hesitance is because he knows what he just did and that it might be an issue. Kate, meanwhile, is undergoing her marriage imploding. We don't know the specifics, but that's what we're going to get in the next episode. We will also get the history of what happened with her abusive boyfriend, Mark. I was wrong about my enjoyment level of these 2 episodes that I just covered, so hopefully I'm wrong about the 3rd episode as well, because as you know, I'm not always the biggest fan of Kate and Toby's storylines. That's all I got for you for this episode. If you like this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Before I go, I would like to talk about my Kickstarter, which I just started. It's live, and it's for Dave 2020, the movie. It's based on my YouTube series. It's going to be the feature-length version of my YouTube series, covering the year that I am currently having, and discussing mental health topics, including anxiety and depression. My series paints these particular issues through me. If you're interested in helping me out, you can go to the link, which I will include in the description of this video, and you can contribute. There are a few rewards for contributing that you can find in the link. Until next time, this is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.